The unassuming little castle behind me was the headquarters of the Earldom of Orkney in the mainland of Britain. This earldom was a Viking feudal kingdom which lasted from the 9th to the 10th centuries, and it was headed, behind me, by Harold Madison. And Harold Madison was the man who united the Earldom of Orkney from Orkney itself, which is far over in that direction, down into Caithness. And if you take a look at Caithness's flag, you'll see the Norwegian influence on it, the Viking influence, with ships coming over. The Earldom of Orkney is a fascinating place, and I aim to take you on a little bit of a tour. Caithness is fascinating for its expansive moors, and it's just almost infinite, like, open spaces. And it almost makes you feel a little bit uneasy driving, almost as if you'll fall right off the edge of the earth.
These videos aren't actually taken in Orkney, but in Caithness. Before the Treaty of Westphalia, sovereignty was an entirely different concept. Oftentimes, countries would pledge allegiance to multiple kings, and serfs would be loyal to one or more feudal lords. This was the case in Caithness. The territory here was essentially an autonomous part of the Earldom of Orkney at its greatest extent. The areas of mainland Scotland that were under the Raven banner of the Mortimerdomo of Caithness pledged loyalty to both the kings of Scotland as well as to the kings of Norway, although most of the rulers were all descendants from the Norse dynasties, because the Scottish authorities simply couldn't enforce their rule of law so far from the population center. The present county of Sutherland and the Highland Sutherland clan is named specifically after their relationship to this Mortimerdomo, being south of their land. Other Scottish clans here show a fascinating assimilation with Norse culture. The Gunn clan, for example, in their genealogies, was supposedly founded by a man named Gunny. This Gunny came to Caithness at the end of the 12th century because his wife inherited a large amount of property from her brother, Harold Madison, the same Madison who owned Wick Castle as his base of operations in mainland Scotland. This shows a fascinating link to the Highland Scottish culture and the Norwegian Viking culture.
I'm standing here next to Lud's Stone, and Lud's Stone has some fascinating local folklore. It's supposedly the resting place of Ljot Thorgensson, or I'll just call him King Lot. King Lot was the king or earl of the island of Orkney, and he expanded his influence down into Caithness. But what I find interesting is the story of his father, a man named Thorfinn Skullsplitter. And in spite of his name, Skullsplitter was a very diplomatic man. He hadn't managed to expand into Caithness, which is mainland Britain. However, he had a really good relationship with the Scottish royalty, including Macbeth. However, his son Lot eventually came along and decided to kill him so that he could expand his influence into mainland Britain and into mainland Scotland. And he did this, but the death of Skullsplitter marked a terrible moment for the Earldom of Orkney because he was a truly great leader. And when he was gone, his son managed to seize control and expand. And he did this successfully, but it made Macbeth very mad. When Macbeth came in, he brought an army, and apparently Lot won the battle. Because of this, he died of his wounds. He was wounded in the battle, and it's said that he's buried here. And according to the woman in the cabin, I didn't even know this, there's another stone nearby which has fallen over that had another king of Orkney buried underneath it. Now we can consider all of these men Viking kings. Now, do I believe that Lot is buried here? I'm not sure. I know that this is not a typical Scandinavian gravestone, but I do know the Scandinavians had enough respect for the ancient Celtic people, because this is ancient compared to King Lot, to bury their leaders underneath their monuments. Now I think that King Lot, or Ljot with a J, appears in Arthurian legends. Now if you consider Arthurian legend, they say the king of Orkney was a man named Lot, L-O-T. Not L-J-O-T, but it's very close, especially if they're just going by word of mouth and legend. And what are King Lot's attributed arms, the Orkney king in Arthurian legend? Well, it's the raven. His coat of arms is a raven. Now, what were the arms of the Vikings in the Viking army? It was the raven banner. Now, I think this is enough evidence tying in to say that this is probably a Viking burial ground. And the owner of the cabin told me that where the camera is right now, there was an ancient cairn, a pile of stones, and that near here is another stone which has fallen over that was home to another king or earl of Orkney. I think that this could have been a sacred Viking area, this whole hill, because it gives a pretty commanding overview of Caithness, although almost any hill would do this. But it's a beautiful area, and you can see the mountains in the background, which is the extent of their kingdom or their earldom.
The question is, what happened when he died? He was killed at the Battle of Skitton, and his brother, Lodvir, went on to marry a woman who was descended from the royal family in Osrag, a Viking polity in Ireland. The dynasties got crossed, and although the two didn't actually merge, they did maintain good relationships and had a very powerful maritime empire. Beyond this, not much is known about Lodvir. In the style of the time, his family linked as many dynasties as possible with Norway, Ireland, and Caithness before he was buried in Hofen, which is now believed to be Huna or Ham in Caithness. These two villages are nearly connected. The town of Huna contains a lot of ancient burial structures, but the town of Ham actually has a lot of these visible. Many sources hold the very easily visible stone cairn in the town of Ham to be the burial place of Hlodvir, who died in around 975 AD. The coast along here seems to connect the islands to the mainland and probably formed a royal settlement. The cairn in Ham easily caught my eye, which shows up in survey maps as just a chambered mound. From the town itself, the tumulus can give amazing views towards the islands in the distance. I like to think that the Viking Earl Hlodvir is resting here, because even the round barrow itself is probably 1,000 years older than the Earldom. They were often reused by later empires, in the same way the Romans buried their royalty in ancient cairns. After visiting the crofting village of Huna and seeing the chambered cairn in Ham, I finally decided to take a ferry over to the Orkney Islands themselves. The cathedral in this ancient capital of the Earldom is named after the martyr Earl Magnus. According to the Orkney Inga saga, Magnus was a gentle and kind soul who refused to take part in the raids on Anglesey, known as the Battle of Menai Straits. Along the voyage he sung psalms and eventually fled altogether. He sought refuge in Scotland and finally returned back to Orkney when a dispute arose between him and his cousin Hakon over the succession of the earldom. He agreed to rule jointly until 1114. Naturally, refusing to join the raids or settle a dispute with bloodshed led to many followers of his cousin labeling him a coward. He fell out of favor with Hakon and had to go into hiding for a little while. The citizens met at what was called a thing, or a citizen congress. The two agreed to meet on an island off the mainland, each bringing only 2 ships to discuss terms of peaceful negotiation. Hakon was a traitor and brought 8. The chieftains on the thing were tired of joint rule. They demanded that one earl must die, so Hakon ordered that his standard bearer execute Magnus. The bearer refused, so the duty fell on the cook, who killed him with an axe to the head. Before dying, Magnus prayed for the souls of Hakon and his executioner. It was the flag of Magnus that was the original banner of the earldom, and eventually the flag of the Kalmar Union, a confederation of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, in the 15th century. This flag also became the unofficial but widely popular flag of Orkney, and was eventually replaced in 2007 after official means weren't recognizing it. Nowadays we have an equally Nordic-looking flag celebrating their Viking heritage. This is reflected as well in Caithness, another Viking-styled flag.